Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey everybody, I am so excited to be welcoming Julian Roberts to the podcast today. Julian is an executive and business coach with a mission to coach high-performing leaders, athletes, and teams with extreme ambitions. Julian is a master at co-creating what may seem to others as impossible, unrealistic goals. Helping you to break boundaries excites him, whether that's helping you to grow your business to X amount of millions or pounds, or whether that is helping you to attempt to set a new world record. Julian, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Thank you for inviting us on, Dave. Good to see you. Really glad to be here and having a conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I am super excited to get into this conversation with you today, all about resiliency. I love the work that you're doing in the coaching space with people that are doing really, really ambitious things. The first time that we had an opportunity to chat through some of your client accomplishments, I was just blown away and couldn't kind of help but to think of getting you on the podcast and kind of talking about this resiliency, how it relates to business, how it relates to people doing just, really, really ambitious things. So maybe you could share a little bit about some of the those ambitious, goals that you've helped people achieve.
Yeah, and that's what does excite me. I have this wonderful privilege of getting alongside individuals or teams who have these big goals, big ambitions. And it's not everybody, but it's ones that really get me excited. I had recently, actually, I had a lady come to me who is attempting, she's an athlete, she's a mental health sort of advocate, and she's attempting to do 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, which is just insane. I mean, we all know doing a marathon is pretty challenging, doing 7 in a row and then doing it on 7 continents. And so she's come to me for some help mentally in terms of a mindset, but also helping with some sort of resilience sort of hacks for her, which interestingly will probably come from herself, to be honest, in terms of how she operates. But that's amazing and it's incredible. And I love how people just put themselves out there and be courageous. I had a client who was, I think at one point they were looking to sort of grow their business up to about sort of 50 million sort of pounds, which is still quite a lot in 10 years. And having spent some time with them, and I wouldn't say push them or cajole them into doing more, but I suppose I opened up opportunities and I started to get a different perspective on what they could do as we started to have a conversation with the team. And they then set a bit of a stall out to go to 100 million was their sort of, let's go for it. And, I always, they're sort of going for that jump and I was thinking, really? Do you want to really do 100 million? And I was like, almost testing no, we've, based on what we've done and the plans we've gone through and the vision and my excitement, all this, and it made sense. And then we built a plan back from that. So I love it how people can just go for it big time, and it really does excite me and be part of that. And I don't say this in a real sort of twee way, but it really is a privilege to be alongside those people who are doing exceptionally amazing things. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine that it is kind of motivating in and of itself to be around people that are, so ambitious in their pursuits, whether that's personally, kind of, professionally in business and in athletics. It really must, kind of just have a real buzz about it. I mean, I know I feel a buzz just hearing kind of your perspective on working with those folks. So, you brought up a word in there that I think gets thrown around quite a bit, especially when we're talking about, kind of coaching, mentoring, even leading people, and that's mindset. But I'm really curious to get your take on, how does mindset kind of play into that resiliency, And from your perspective, what does resiliency really mean? Is it mindset? Is it something different than that?
Yeah, good question. Resilience, I mean, for me, resiliency is something that we can actually learn. It's a skill. I think often people think that some people are more resilient than others. I'm not, obviously, at certain points in time, it appears that people are, but it's a skill that you can develop, you can hone, you can sort of grow into more and sort of create more resilience. I think people get tested probably more, seem to employ possibly more resilient skills in terms of whether they sort of grow up in terms of in terms of trauma or in terms of just challenges they have, and test that resiliency. Because you can take teams or individuals on a process of understanding how to build resilience, but until you're tested to it, you'll see how that sort of skill gets honed. And it's like anything, isn't it? You learn something until you have to put it to practice, and that's when you start to see how that plays out. So it's a skill that I help people. But in terms of mindset, I think mindset comes into it, because often it's sometimes your perspective on a situation can really change how you view something and how you deal with it and how you overcome something. Because at the end of the day, wherever we are, whatever situation, we will always face some form of challenge, whether that's in business or personally. And sometimes they're big and sometimes they're small. But it's all about the perspective you come at that challenge. And I think that's, you call that a skill or a mindset. It's a bit of both going on there. And I often say to people, that when you see a challenge in front of you, if you're rooted in say your purpose, because obviously it's important to get an understanding of your purpose, but also it could be in a business context where you actually get an understanding of your mission statement, and things will happen. The economy goes bad, you lose a client, we have COVID, all those things. And COVID is a classic example. I remember having a number of conversations with a number of CEOs who were in a state of shock, as we all were, when it all sort of kicked off. And I remember one CEO I had a conversation with, and I said to them, who were in a bit of a state, I said, does your purpose or your mission of your business, has it changed really because of what's going on? And he said, well, not really, few little tweaks. I said, okay. And I said, well, that's your sort of your guiding light, your true north, whatever you want to call it. That's your anchor. The only difference is how you go about it and the timing of things. That's the only thing that's changed. And so I encouraged him to get his team together, go through the vision, the mission of their business, get energized, get stirred again. They had this big problem called the pandemic. The purpose had not changed, but then they started thinking, okay, how can we get around this to get back to that purpose again? What are the strategies we need to do? What are the ways of working we need to do? Where do we need to invest? Where do we need to sort of change and adapt? And it started to create a lot of energy, and they then started to work out. And it created different mindsets, because it wasn't focused on the problem. It was focused on the bigger thing, which was their purpose, the one that's more fulfilling, that's more energizing, more future. And that was what got them through and helped them navigate those challenges. And we can do that ourselves on a personal perspective or within a business context as well.
Wow. That was full of so many amazing insights in there. Just a few takeaways of what you just said, because I'm sure people out there, myself included, yourself included, people that are maybe not as resilient. They've faced some really challenging things in their lives, and there definitely is some personality within that, where some people are quicker to bounce back, some people are a little bit more optimistic and can have that fail forward type of mentality, and then there are others who really struggle with that. And so I love what you said there. One, that everybody could kind of sharpen their skills when it comes to resiliency. And just because maybe you're not necessarily that glass half full all of the time, and bounce back quickly, there are some things that you can do to help around that. And I really love that second piece about kind of digging back down and identifying, not so much identifying, but kind of reconnecting with your North Star, with your anchor, whatever you'd like to call it, and let that continue to guide you forward. Because I think to that point, right, so often when those types of situations happen to us, we feel that they're happening to us, and we're kind of like dealing with the symptoms of that instead of staying focused on that North Star. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you kind of agree with that, or would you shape that slightly different? Yeah,
no, I would agree with that. And it's interesting you mentioned some people are more sort of half full and more positive. In some ways, those sort of people, and just if I understand my definition of resilience is, for me, is you get knocked down or something comes in your way and you bounce back. But before you bounce back and get back up, you learn how to get through what's knocked you down, basically. That's resilience. Resilience is, for me, is the key thing, is the learning loop that goes with it. And often, like, positive people can be a little bit like gung-ho and it's all going to be fine. And well, actually, if you carry on in the same trajectory, it won't all be fine, because you're just going to come against the same problem, the same issue. And so there can be a bit of problem when there's people who are really optimistic and a bit let's just keep going, or actually what you need is grit and determination. Just got to hunker down and just go for it. Well, no. There's an element of that we need sometimes, but actually what we do need is, once you've been knocked sideways or whatever's happened, do some learning. What's happened here? Why has this happened? Regroup, whether that's individually or as a team. How can we get through this, and what can we do next time and learn differently? That's resilience for me, is that ability to bounce back in a sort of thoughtful, full of wisdom on what you've just gone through. Otherwise, you're not going to carry. You're going to hit the same sort of roadblock again along the way.
Yeah, I mean that's a great that's a great perspective on things, because it's kind of going to be a little bit of a later question, but I'm glad you brought it up, because I think for some people, to your point, you kind of could look at that and say, well, at what point do we kind of take that reflection, and do we change direction? Do we learn from what we're doing versus, just kind of continuing to plug forward? So I like that you brought that up. In terms of kind of that reflection moment to really help propel you forward, do you have any kind of exercises or things that you like to encourage people to do to help promote some of that? What can we take away from this particular thing? Because I've said it many of times, you do really learn the most when the seas are rough. It never feels like that at the time, no. But coming out of the other side of it, there are definitely things that you can learn. So I'd love to find out if you have kind of some practices or techniques, things that you encourage people to do to really hone in on those lessons.
I think the key thing is, which we're all guilty of, is what we don't do is we don't stop. And, often in businesses, they encounter a problem, they somehow get through it and they just carry on. And sometimes if they don't deal with that issue, the problem will just keep coming back again. And it's and I say a lot to a lot of companies, but also individually, is take some time to stop. And to really reflect and put some time in. And so, it's important, say from a team context, that's, to do a debrief, literally. And it sounds really very obvious here and very basic stuff, but you'd be surprised. And because people see when they failed, say perhaps they were launching something or they're aimed to do something and there's a failure that happens, people feel they don't want to talk about it because it feels it's really negative and it's like a negative feeling. But actually I say, no. Do it in a context of what you're going to learn. So have the intent or your mindset or set your antennae focus on what can we learn from this. We're not looking back to wallow. We're not looking back to think, oh, that was terrible, and focus on the issue. We're looking back to say, what can we learn? And it's literally going around the room in the context and asking everybody to freely, openly say, what do we learn from this? How can we take some learnings and just asking those open questions and facilitating that and literally writing everything down on a flip chart, however you facilitate that, and get people to just contribute of what they could do differently next time. Because when you build in like resilient processes, there's one I use where people basically minimize, manage, and mend. So minimize is all about building in like standard operating procedures. And so when you've gone through an issue, as in, do we need to change our standing operating procedures? Do we need to change the way we do things next time? We had a crisis here, that didn't work. We need to reroute and do things. And then manage, or how do we sort of go about managing crisis, in terms of communication, the speed, and bringing together sort of groups of teams and to talk about it and to sort of bring that sense of understanding what's going on and how we move forward. Again, do we need to change that from what we've just been through? And then after the final loop is the debrief, the mend bit, as in going back the circle again. And so I don't have any specific exercise, but if I was in a context of a room, I would literally be asking questions and just probing, what did you learn? Why do you think that went wrong? Then the else we do differently. And it's just asking those questions, just probing questions in a nice way to facilitate and get as much richness from that. And then you'll think, okay, we need to do this now differently. We've learned this. But I think the big thing is to take the time out to do it. And preferably you can do it outside the business in terms of another location. Can just facilitate a little bit more openness and people feeling more to share again, rather than in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, that's really great. I almost equate it to just some really good leadership fundamentals, team building, asking more questions in general, but obviously pointed questions, and facilitating kind of an open air policy. And obviously that works well in a team environment, but I would kind of imagine, even if this was a self-reflection period, kind of putting a actual set time on your calendar to kind of work through some of these questions, writing them out, even saying them out loud, and kind of just getting them in a space. That may sound, kind of unconventional or silly to some people that are listening, but I think the reality of it is that in order to kind of accept what's happened and really find those key learnings, that you have to do some of those things. You have to create that space in order to do that. And for sure, when you are working through this process with a team, you've got to do that. You've got to engage people and kind of empower them to understand that, we're going to kind of figure this out together, and we're going to work through the process, and we're going to take some key learnings away from this that ultimately impact the next time that something like this, happens. So,
yeah, I was talking to an elite triathlete yesterday, and she had an expectation in a race to become, I think, get second ranking, and she ended up being fourth. Now, to her on the day, that was just terrible. And if you've done and there's obviously a lot of emotion in an Ironman racing, so there's a lot of emotion, a lot of energy, a lot of stuff. Now, that done on the day, then that wouldn't be helpful. So sometimes it's good to separate some time from when you have had the incident, issue, crisis, whatever. It's just a bit of time to take away some of the emotion, and so you're thinking a bit clearer as well. Because trying to do a debrief in the context, like that lady on the day of it, the coach came to her and started, let's do a debrief. Be like, that wouldn't be helpful because there's too many emotions. We're not not logical thinking here. It's going to be quite sore and everything else. Let's give a few days. And I think 3 or 4 days later, they did a debrief and went through it in a more logical way to see what the learnings were next time, all that type of thing. And so it's important to separate a little bit of time from the point of when the issue happened as well.
Yeah, that's really good, kind of advice and feedback for people, because oftentimes in I would say kind of our haste to maybe problem solve or to, rectify the situation, put some sort of preventative measures in place, those types of things, we may be kind of attacking the issue a bit too soon and leaving some space in there to kind of let those emotions run free, and then attacking it from a bit more of a logical place where people can have some dialogue, and it's not argumentative or confrontational. It's productive time that we're spending. So I really like that. Julian, would you say, I'm curious to get your takeaway, do you think that gratitude plays some part in resiliency at all? And if so, kind of at what point?
Yeah, you're talking about ways of, I guess, stimulating this sense of positivity and perspective, because we know that the gratitude, by being grateful, releases that dopamine and serotonin, doesn't it? Which are those sort of neurotransmitters that create that sort of feel good emotions. And I think and by having that feel good emotions, you start to feel more positive, and you start to have this more. You see more the silver linings as opposed to the dark clouds, and I think it's a slight tilt in our perspective, isn't it? It's like when you. And it plays into a bit of confirmation bias as well. If you wake up in the morning and think, oh, the day's just going to be terrible today, your body, your system, will find ways to tell you and confirm that bias that you've just said at the start of the day. It is terrible. You will, I don't know, stub your toe, trip over the dog. A whole host of stuff will happen throughout your day, and you'll get to the end of the day and I'll see, terrible day, and you've just confirmed it. However, you set yourself a little bit more, I'm not just talking about manifesting here, I'm talking genuine psychology here. I'm just going to have a positive day. My intent is to make the most of every opportunity today. You will start to see opportunities. You'll start to see things more positively than setting it otherwise. And I think what the gratitude piece does, it sets your tone, and that's why it's healthy to do it at the start of the day, to almost be grateful before you've even started the day. Of simple things. I'm alive. I've got a roof over my head. I've got whatever it may be. It can be small things, it can be big things, because it physiologically does stuff to you, and it does create that positive stuff. So if you're setting your day in a positive mindset, you're going to see the more silver linings. It's like there's this thing in your brain middle brain called your reticular activating system. It's called a RAS. It's a bundle of neurons, which they're your filters. Our brains can only take in so much, surprisingly, and we have a bit of a sensory overload coming in. And so what it does is puts this filter in place, and it sets according to what you set it. So if you set it, that's why goal setting is really important. If you set it to, say, I've just bought a yellow car, I want to see all the yellow cars, you'll suddenly see, there's loads of yellow cars today, isn't there? And because you've set it, and it'll filter. And so the same thing is, if you set it for like some positive intention to see some good in things, you'll see all that. And likewise, if you see it negatively. And so that's another way of setting yourself up for the day as well. So gratitude plays into all that as well. But yeah, very important. And I always say to people, if you're feeling a bit down, a bit glum about things, and you just can't see anything good in it, just do some practice gratitude. And it's hard at first, but once you start doing it, actually, I start to feel quite good about this. I feel good because there's a chemical reaction going on.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard similar things, and I was curious to get your takeaway, because I love to kind of make that connection between, to me it almost seems like I talk a lot about kind of a cycle of continuous improvement. And when I was thinking about the topic and kind of thinking about, how do you get yourself into that cycle? Because as I said, some people are more positive, some people are a bit less positive. There are definitely people that, that you meet and know in your life that are more resilient in general than others. There's a lot of talk about mental health, and not to go down that route, but, there are definitely people that struggle to be resilient. And so I really wanted to hear your perspective on kind of a way to tie those things together. So I really appreciate that kind of gratitude piece. I mean, have you seen any other types of examples that kind of lend themselves into this, kind of cycle of improvement, kind of self-being that helps you ultimately, be better from the resilience piece? And again, I kind of go back to, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about specific to your business or kind of life goals. I think it's all very relational in terms of kind of, oneself and getting yourself into this cycle of improvement to ultimately impact that. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think mindfulness is a really good tool to really help you ultimately build resilience. I mean, it's whether you facilitate that through yourself, through breath work, or through yoga. There's apps out there. There's many ways to be mindful, and mindfulness is, in essence, is being in the moment, being in the present. And we often don't, and that sounds really weird because we are in the present, but we're not. Our minds are not in the present. Our bodies are in the present. And that's why doing breath work connects your mind to your body, and therefore you're in the present. And that's really important. And why that is important is that when we're in the present, we are in absolute control of everything. I mean to be fully present with the conversation with you right now, and not think of anything else, and just be present. And so I'm in control of everything. Therefore, I'm at peace. I'm more relaxed. I'm more using my prefrontal cortex brain, my front brain, my logic brain, my reasoning brain. The moment you start being out of the present and go into the future, your body has a reaction of, well, that's uncertain. And uncertainty causes me a little bit of concern. I can't control that. And suddenly you're thinking about tomorrow, you're thinking about next week, thinking about when I get my next paycheck or when next client's going to come through. And suddenly you go off, and then you go out of control. And then you kick into your amygdala, which your chimp brain, basically. Fight or flight. Your emotions start going, and suddenly, and you can almost trigger it yourself. Start thinking of something really negative and bad, and so you can feel these emotions kicking in your body because you're out of control, and your body wants to fight or flight and start doing something about it, and so you lose your logic. And then the other opposite of that is if you go into the past, as in, oh, I wish I'd done this, should have done this yesterday, and live in regrets, then you just get depressed because you can't do anything about it. And this builds into resilience, because when you're wanting to navigate challenges and issues, you really want to do it in a very clear way of thinking. You want to employ your logic brain, your reasoning brain. You don't want to be riding with emotions, because you won't make any sense of what you're trying to do, and you'll just get things wrong anyway, because those emotions are just emotions, basically. They're not really telling you a lot. Whether you're excited or fearful, in essence, are the same emotions. So your brain can't distinguish it, and so we have to sort of make sure we're more in the present. And when you're in the present, you are in control. You can see things clearly, and you're more relaxed and more at peace, and that builds that whole resilience piece as well. So I would always encourage people, and I do this sometimes when I'm getting late, like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? This is not happening. I will literally I'd take a deep breath in 4 seconds, hold that breath, breathe it out 4 seconds, and then hold it out 4 seconds. And I do that 3 or 4 times. And it also, what it does, it clicks into the vagus nerve, which helps you go from what you call the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, to more the parasympathetic, and it calms you down. And I do that, and you'll suddenly see your emotions relax, and then suddenly you think, okay, and you can just assess the situation and start to realize what's going on, what I need to do next, how's this impacting me, and you think clearly. And that's a helpful way of moving forward. So yeah, mindfulness. A very long-winded explanation there, but I would say mindfulness.
No, I mean, It's just super fascinating stuff to me because, again, it's things that we all deal with, business owners. It doesn't matter kind of the goal that we're after and kind of the role that you play, whether you're on somebody's team, you're an operations leader, you're a business owner, you are, an all-star athlete that is trying to achieve something that's never been done before. It's just, and I'm curious too, like I could literally talk to you for like hours because it's just super, super fascinating to me. And I think it's powerful stuff for people to hear and to start to understand. I'm curious, from your perspective, has a lot of this kind of mindfulness, all of those activities, has that come over more from like the athlete world, the top tier, highest performing people that have always been coached, into kind of the business world and more generally just to people? Or where do you what was the genesis of all of this? Because it's super fascinating to me.
It's a really good question, and to be honest, I don't know the answer where this mindfulness, I guess I say trend, but impact has come from. I see it's in all walks of life, whether it's from a personal life, business, athletes. In my practice, I'm not a mindfulness coach as such, but I'm aware that it's really helpful, and I sometimes might advise my clients to do some mindfulness techniques. Go off on the internet, have a look at stuff, go for some apps. But I don't know where it's actually come from. I mean, I know, and it's not quite mindfulness, but I know visualization obviously has been very much part of the athlete community. And I use a lot of visualization even within my coaching with leaders and stuff. So that's a really sort of powerful tool. And it's a slight tangent what you're saying there, but it's a useful tool for also navigating challenges and sort of building that sort of how do you overcome things, because and I use a lot of visualization, not just about winning and getting to the end, but that visualization, I call it process visualization, where you I don't know, say for example it could be that you're going for a negotiation with a client, and it's more about and you might visualize the whole process of that negotiation going really, really well, which is really helpful. What you see, feel, hear, smell and taste and all that sort of stuff. And then you visualize certain aspects that are not going as well as you'd expect. Things are going quietly wrong. And that sounds like, well, that sounds very negative, but actually it's good to get yourself in that zone. Actually, that could go wrong, and think about that. But then also, what are the strategies to mitigate that? So you have the problems come up. This could go wrong, therefore I'm going to put this strategy in place. And then when these things happen, i.e. things go wrong, you've got an immediate strategy to go with it. But also, because you've prepared yourself, and this almost ties into resiliency, you've prepared yourself that when that happens, your body goes, oh, I've been there before, done that, and move forward. And so your emotions, I mean, Michael Phelps used this an awful lot. He got the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He got the I think it was a 200-meter fly world record and gold. But you probably weren't aware of this, that the last 75 meters of that race, his goggles were full of water. You couldn't see. And yet he still managed a world record and a gold. And he used to visualize and would do a lot of stuff, things going wrong. So he would have visualized his swimsuit tearing, diving in badly, his goggles filling of water, and then he would have had then strategies. So when it does happen, you don't get so shocked, you don't get so thrown, because actually, I've already been here. I've lived this experience if you do it really well, and I'll just put this strategy in place because that's what I've already thought of. And it really helps you navigate those difficult, whether it's negotiation, whether it's presenting, and you can do it in everyday life. And I find that a really helpful tool. But I also, to add to that, I use it with teams a lot. And this is a really good way of helping navigate real solutions to problems. I was coaching a team of ladies who were looking to row around Great Britain to break a world record. And we did this visualization, and I said to them to all to think of of putting out a power anchor. A power anchor is an anchor that helps stabilize this rowing boat when they're in sort of in sort of storms and things. And so they all visualized putting it all out. And I said, well, let's visualize things going wrong with that. So they all had those visualizations. And then they all shared the various ways that it went wrong, which was really insightful because they all had different perspectives. And then they all shared how they'd overcome it. And so from that, individual sharing created a real team learning of, oh yeah, that could go wrong. I never thought about that. And then thought, well, this is how we'll do this. And therefore, that visualization. So when it did happen, A, they won't be surprised because they've already been there. And then B, straight in with the strategy because we've just already thought about it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're like mic dropping left and right here. That was amazing, an amazing story. And for me, the thing that kept kind of playing over is, so often we are in reactive situations and going through this, it really forces you, it helps you. I shouldn't say it forces you, but it really helps you shift gears and become proactive because you're already thinking about all of the things that can go wrong, that can be a roadblock for you, versus waiting for those things to happen and then reacting to that situation and then trying to uncover, well, what exactly happened. I really love that example, and I think it can be applied so many different areas, kind of personally and in business, to help you make that shift. So great story. Julian, I think we should probably wind up here, even though I'm having an amazing conversation with you. Any final thoughts when it comes to resiliency? Any stories that you haven't shared? Anything you'd like to kind of leave with people as we wind this conversation down?
Yeah, well, as a thought I had with the lady I was speaking to yesterday, who said, we're talking about failure, because often resilience and failure sort of come in. And firstly, I always think failures, it's just feedback. Things have not gone as well as you. So see it as feedback. It just changes the perspective on it a little bit and takes the sort of sting out of it, but also creates this learning mindset as well, because I'm looking for the feedback of this. But she said failure is when you don't learn from it. And it's that point when you failed when you don't learn. And that's the different perspective on it all. So just making sure that whatever happens, however we do things, just be in a growth mindset, a learning mindset, and take that ability to always do things differently and be agile and try to adapt and get help for that outside externally. I'm not just about coaches, but other people around you who can help you give a different perspective on it. It's really important to just have that learning mindset and challenge yourselves. And it's interesting, the whole learning piece and how people get into grooves. We all get into little grooves of way of doing things. And I always say to people, if you always used to go to the shops or your work one way, try a different way. Just see the differences. Just challenge your brain a little bit. Do something different and get used to doing things differently. So when things require you to be different, it's not such a shock to your system. So it's all about preparing your system ready, your body to overcome and know that you're going to be agile and change accordingly.
That was great, man. Thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast, Julian.
Oh, thank you. I've loved talking to you. It's been great. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.